guys, today we're going to take a look at the assembled, detailed, and weathered E-Flite P-47 Thunderbolt. Now, the P-47 was originally developed to be a high-altitude bomber escort. However, it had one major problem. It sucked a lot of fuel, so it required the use of drop tanks in order to extend its range to try to get the aircraft further into enemy territory and protect the bombers. Unfortunately, what had happened is the Germans, of course, figured this out, that if the P-47s would drop the drop tanks to engage the enemy fighter planes, they would simply run out of fuel and have to head back to base early, leaving the bombers completely out in the open. So, what happened when this was going on is that these aircraft, these P-47s, were low on fuel, they had to return to base, and they had plenty of ammunition on board, but they never got a chance to use it. So, during one of the dogfights, a P-47 somewhat became disoriented and decided to kind of head back to base, and in the process of doing so, he was at a low altitude after the dogfight and realized that with all his ammunition on board, he was going to take out some ground targets he found. So it's really the first time that a P-47 was used in what is considered like a fighter bomber or strafing type role. So this kind of became more common as the war progressed. P-47s had any ammunition left over after guarding the bombers but didn't have enough fuel. On their return run would go down on the deck and find some targets, strafe them on the way back to England. Eventually that kind of became policy for the Army Air Force. On the way back, find some targets and take them out. So they actually developed special strafing tactics that were used on how to attack these targets effectively. And this kind of began the role of what we now call close air support. Also, at the time, was considered the fighter bomber. Now, interesting enough, the P-51 Mustang was actually developed to be a close air support ground attack fighter, except for the coolant system. The liquid cooling system was very vulnerable to attack. Any type of a bullet that would hit the radiator or into the coolant system would render the aircraft useless. So the P-47, on the other hand, with this gigantic air-cooled engine and a reputation for being incredibly rugged, really became a better fit for the ground attack role, and the P-51 was actually a better fit for the high-altitude dogfighter and bomber escort. So there's a little history background on the P-47 in general. This particular aircraft, MXE, was actually assigned to the 78th Fighter Group, based in Duxford, England, which is actually the site of a war museum today, and they actually host a number of air shows at Duxford. So the aircraft started off, they had the Razorback style, and then later on in the probably around June time frame, they began to receive the D model with the bubble canopy. This particular model with the invasion stripes may not have actually ever seen the invasion of Normandy. It's pretty common that the aircraft were actually, the non-Razorback models, the D models, were arriving a little bit later into June. And when they arrived, they actually arrived all silver. That started actually a little bit earlier, so there are some Razorbacks that were used that were all silver. Now the pilots didn't like the idea of flying a bright silver aircraft, and so what they did is they took it upon themselves and the ground crews to paint them green and gray. And so this aircraft here, and a lot of them at Duxford, part of the 70th Fighter Group, are actually painted in RAF green and RAF sky gray, and not U.S. Army Air Corps olive drab and neutral gray. So that explains why the aircraft is a little bit different color than what normally you would see from the Army Air Force. So there's been a lot of talk where they say, oh, I really wish this aircraft would have been painted correctly. Actually, it is painted correctly because the ground crews were doing it themselves. So, moving on, let's talk about the invasion stripes real quick. There's a lot of confusion over the use of the invasion stripes. If you notice, this aircraft does not have any on the upper surfaces. Now, sometime around June 3rd, 4th, 5th, somewhere in that time frame, ground crews were ordered to paint the black and white stripes over the top and bottom of the wings and top and bottom of the fuselage to help make the aircraft a little bit easier to identify as friendlies during the invasion of Normandy, both from other fighter aircraft as well as AAA batteries on the ground. So that was an attempt to try to identify friendly forces. Well, starting in about July time frame, there became a rule that says, you know, we got to get rid of the invasion stripes on the upper surfaces. They're actually making it easy for the Luftwaffe to spot from the air. So all the upper surfaces were returned to green, and the invasion stripes remained on the bottom. Now, aircraft that never had them on the top still received invasion stripes on the bottom to help with friendly fire incidents. So that's why you see this aircraft with just stripes on the bottom. That's actually period correct. So the white stripes you see on the tail surfaces are actually, they started doing that from the very beginning as a way to identify that these were American aircraft being used in the European theater, and as well as they had a white stripe on the nose. In fact, if you look at the UMX P-47 from E-Flite, you'll notice it's got that big white band on the front. That was another way to help identify these aircraft. Now, there became so many aircraft operating in the European theater of operations that the fighter group decided they wanted to be unique, and they actually came up with this checkerboard pattern to make their aircraft really stand out. Now, each P-47 was hand painted by one of the ground crews, so no two P-47s were ever identical. So it's hard to imagine that someone would have actually taken the time to hand paint that, but that's exactly how it was done. Eventually, the group transitioned away from the P-47s to P-51 Mustangs, and I'm sure everybody knows the P-51 Big Beautiful Doll with all that checkerboard paint on the front. That's actually from the same fighter group that used to operate this P-47. So for this particular aircraft, it's a little bit of a mystery who exactly flew it. I looked through as many records as I could, and I can see that the aircraft was obviously based at Duxford with 78th, but no pilot was assigned to it, which means it was probably just used by whatever pilot was available for that particular mission. Now, the aircraft was used for some aerial photography to help show off the paint scheme that they were using, and Dick Hewitt was the pilot on board MXE for that photography exercise, but he was never the actual pilot for this airplane. He just happened to be using it for the day those photographs were taken. So I have no idea who actually flew the airplane or what the history of this particular aircraft is, but we can kind of get a pretty good idea from the history of the fighter group that it was definitely used in ground attack, post-Normandy invasion, most likely around July or August of 44. And the records do indicate that sometime late summer that it was involved in a taxi accident and may have actually been destroyed. So the aircraft only had a very short time in operation. So, well, there's a good background on the P-47 in this particular one. So let's take a look at what I did to kind of detail this aircraft out. We'll start right here at the nose, and I started with the Cali graphics. I added the Hamilton Standard logos, as well as the prop nomenclature, and the kind of the placard that sits close to the hub. Also, looking at a lot of the pictures, the center part of the hub was also aluminum, so that's been painted silver. And for fun, I actually polished up the hub just because it looks cool. Why not? So that's kind of details of the prop. And then as for the engine, I kind of added some details. I painted the hub in front of the cylinders, detailed each one of the cylinder heads, and I also painted the firewall black. So when you look inside here, you don't see the white foam behind the motor. It's all solid black now. The cowl flaps have all been weathered and detailed. There's black paint thinned out on the inside of the flaps to give it texture, as well as chips around there. A number of the access panels around the aircraft have also been given chips. There's also a couple oil streaks that come back from the cowl. Taking a look on the top of the wings here, the gun ports have been painted silver. It's questionable whether or not these were painted. Some were painted, some look to be dark color, black or green, but I decided to make mine stand out and paint them silver. That's the way most of the ones I've looked at are. So behind the guns, you're going to have a little bit of black soot from the gunpowder. There's also, I believe this is a fuel filler cap here, so there's going to be a little bit of oil or fuel spillage behind that. This panel here and here are the access panels. This is for the ammunition. This is actually for the guns. So you'll have some chipping around these panels, as well as some dirt. And then it was pretty common on either side of the wing that they would actually have a crew member hanging on out here to help guide the pilot during taxiing. So expect to see some dirt up in this region here. Most of it is on this side, on this particular aircraft, just because that's what I ended up doing. Up around the wing root here, on both sides, you're going to see some chipping and dirt from the ground crew and the pilots getting into the aircraft and the ground crew, helping the pilot get into position. So just a little bit of weathering and dirt around there really goes a long way. Remember, this aircraft wasn't used for a terribly long time, so don't expect it to be too terribly dirty. So, all right, well, let's take a look at the bottom half. All right, so there we can see the invasion stripes that we talked about earlier. So a couple things I did down here. I painted the inside of the wheel wells zinc chromate using acrylic zinc chromate paint, as well as inside the gear doors. The factory tires have been replaced with these units from Robart that are actually substantially more detailed. However, they are very heavy, so be aware of that if you're going to install these on your aircraft. These are much, much heavier than the E-Flite foam ones. So since these aircraft primarily operated off of dirt, there's some mud and splatters behind the wheel wells and up against the flaps, and some just general dirt and grime that comes from the wheel wells. Also, got oil staining coming back from the bottom of the cowl. It kind of streaks back. This is the oil cooler exit vents here, so expect that there'll probably be some oil leaks on the cooler, so have some oil streaking back. Now these here are not really the exhaust pipes. What this is here is actually the wastegate exit for the turbocharger. So you are going to have quite a bit of an exhaust staining effect behind the wastegate, but when the wastegate was closed, in order for them to make maximum amount of boost, the exhaust is actually in the back here. This is where the turbocharger compressor housing is situated. So exhaust gases are passed through the sides here by the wastegates, which when they're closed, puts maximum exhaust through here, through channels inside the airframe, to the turbocharger, which is then spooled up, and exhaust gases are spent out the back. And then pressurized air is sent through intercoolers, which these are actually the intercooler exits right here. So the intercooler is set right about here, and the intercoolers receive air, fresh air from this large air intake in the nose, which ducted all the way through here, through the intercoolers, which cooled the pressurized air, and then the air exited behind the vents here, and then compressed air was sent all the way up to the carburetor, and then put back in the engine. And then that, with the addition of water injection, gave the P-47 really incredible performance. So it operates just like a turbocharger in a car, except for this is actually mounted in an airplane and a lot older than most people think turbocharging's been around. So expect a lot of exhaust staining and stuff behind the compressor outlet. So that kind of wraps up the bottom of the aircraft, a lot of the detailing. I didn't go too crazy, of course, with the weathering, because like I said before, the aircraft I don't think operated for very long. So I hope everybody kind of enjoyed a brief history of the P-47, as well as a look at how to detail yours to kind of give it a little bit more realism. If you're looking for some books on the P-47, I got a couple here that I found to be absolutely outstanding. If you're looking for what it was like to be on the ground just after the invasion of Normandy and have P-47s flying overhead providing close air support, If You Survive by George Wilson is a really amazing first-hand account. And it talks quite a bit about what it was like when the P-47s would come rolling in with 850 calibers opening up on German positions. So check that one out. It's a really good read. If you look at it from the same storyline, but from the pilot's perspective, The Fighter Bomber Boys, P-47 Pilot by Tom Glenn is a really good read. I look at this is a very raw book. I was actually quite surprised that it doesn't seem to follow regular history books. It was written a first-hand experience, just as this one was, and it really shed some light onto what it was like being a frontline fighter bomber pilot in the European theater. So really another outstanding book. It's a quick read. It includes a number of pictures. I highly suggest it. And then, of course, if you're looking for more historical background and pictures and looking at pictures of the aircraft in service, the 78th Fighter Group is another good book. And these are always good anyway, because these kind of go in depth on how to properly weather the aircraft. These are used by a lot of model builders, and I've used these in the Squadron Signal books growing up for a lot of model airplanes. So there we go. If you want to learn more about the P-47, you can always pick up a book and read it. There's a lot of videos on YouTube as well. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. The next steps for this guy is actually to get the CG set and go put this thing up in the air and see how the maiden goes. So hope you guys enjoyed it. Subscribe to the BRGT350 YouTube page for even more videos. See you guys.